Book number 1, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, 1932. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, published in 1932, was banned in Ireland, India, and Australia for its controversial content. The novel describes a future society where humans are created in laboratories, sorted into genetic castes, and controlled through pharmaceutical drugs that keep the population compliant and happy. When published, this seemed like absurd science fiction. Today, many of Huxley's predictions have become reality, making the novel disturbingly prophetic about the world we actually built. Huxley predicted in vitro fertilization decades before it existed. His world state manufactures humans in bottles using artificial wombs and genetic manipulation. The first successful IVF baby, Louise Brown, was born in 1978, 46 years after the novel was published. Today, IVF is routine, with millions of babies conceived this way. Huxley also predicted genetic engineering and designer babies. His society sorts humans into alpha, beta, and gamma castes based on genetic modification. While we haven't created official castes, genetic screening of embryos, gene editing with CRISPR, and enhancement of human traits are now possible and increasingly common. The novel's most chilling prediction was pharmaceutical control of the population. In Brave New World, citizens take a drug called Soma that eliminates anxiety, sadness, and discontent, keeping everyone artificially happy and compliant. When Huxley wrote this, antidepressants and mood-altering pharmaceuticals barely existed. Today, millions of people take daily medications to manage mood and mental state. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs, and attention medications are prescribed on a massive scale. While these drugs help many people, Huxley's concern was society using pharmaceuticals to eliminate natural human emotions and create compliant citizens who never question authority. Huxley predicted consumer culture as a control mechanism. His world state keeps citizens distracted with constant entertainment, shopping, and casual sex. The phrase "ending is better than mending" encourages throwing things away rather than repairing them to keep consumption high. This disposable consumer culture, with planned obsolescence and constant upgrades for phones, cars, and technology, is now standard in developed countries. Huxley saw consumption not as prosperity, but as a tool for social control, keeping people focused on acquiring things rather than questioning the system. The novel also predicted sleep conditioning and subconscious manipulation. Characters in Brave New World receive messages while sleeping that shape their beliefs and desires without conscious awareness. While we don't have sleep conditioning, behavioral psychology, targeted advertising, and algorithm-driven content create similar effects. Social media platforms and recommendation algorithms shape beliefs and desires, often without users realizing they're being manipulated. The idea that humans can be conditioned to want what the system needs them to want has become sophisticated reality. Brave New World was banned because authorities found its vision of the future immoral and dangerous. The novel challenged ideas about family, religion, and traditional values. But the deeper reason for censorship may have been that Huxley's predictions were too accurate. He didn't just imagine a dystopia, he described the logical endpoint of trends already beginning in his time. The book remains controversial because it forces readers to ask whether our society, with its genetic engineering, pharmaceutical mood management, and consumer culture, is becoming the world Huxley warned about. The novel's accuracy makes it more disturbing now than when it was written nearly a century ago. Book number 2, 1984 by George Orwell, 1949. George Orwell's 1984, published in 1949, was banned in the Soviet Union and other communist countries for its depiction of totalitarian surveillance. The novel describes a future where the government monitors citizens constantly, rewrites history, and controls reality itself through propaganda and language manipulation. Orwell wrote the book as a warning about where totalitarianism could lead. 75 years later, his predictions about surveillance technology and control of information have become reality in ways that would have seemed impossible when the book was published. Orwell predicted mass surveillance with telescreens, two-way television devices that watch citizens while they watch propaganda. When Orwell wrote this, television was barely invented. The idea that screens could watch back seemed like science fiction. Today, we have exactly what Orwell predicted. Smart TVs, laptops, phones, and home assistants have cameras and microphones that can record users. Multiple scandals have revealed these devices do watch and listen, even when supposedly off. Security cameras, facial recognition, and tracking technology monitor citizens in public spaces constantly. China's social credit system combines surveillance technology with consequences for behavior that Orwell's Oceania would recognize. The novel predicted doublespeak and reality manipulation. In 1984, the government constantly changes historical records, so the past always supports current propaganda. The Ministry of Truth, where the protagonist works, literally rewrites history, making it impossible to prove the government is lying. Orwell couldn't have imagined the internet, but his concern about information control has become more relevant in the digital age. Social media platforms amplify or suppress information based on algorithms. Deepfake technology can create convincing fake videos. Political leaders routinely deny documented facts, calling accurate reporting fake news. The ability to manipulate what people believe is true has become sophisticated in ways Orwell anticipated. Orwell predicted thought crime and punishment for internal beliefs, not just actions. In 1984, thinking rebellious thoughts is illegal, and the thought police arrest citizens for mental crimes before they act. This seemed absurd in 1949, but modern surveillance capitalism tracks not just behavior, but predicted future behavior. Social media companies and governments analyze posts, searches, and associations to identify people with dangerous ideas before they act on them. Predictive policing uses algorithms to identify potential criminals. The line between monitoring actions and policing thoughts has blurred in ways Orwell warned about. The novel predicted perpetual war as a control mechanism. Oceania is constantly at war with either Eurasia or Eastasia, and the war never ends because it serves to keep the population under control and justify shortages. This perpetual conflict with enemies constantly shifting has parallels in modern geopolitics, where the war on terror created ongoing conflict without clear victory conditions. Orwell understood that governments could use permanent war to maintain emergency powers and suppress dissent indefinitely. The telescreen and constant propaganda predicted modern media saturation. Characters in 1984 cannot escape screens and propaganda. Every space has telescreens broadcasting messages. This seemed exaggerated in 1949, but describes modern life where screens are everywhere. People carry smartphones providing constant content and advertising. The idea that citizens would voluntarily carry surveillance devices and spend hours daily consuming content through them would have been unbelievable to Orwell. Yet here we are. 1984 was banned because communist governments recognized themselves in Orwell's Oceania. But the novel's predictions apply beyond any single political system. Orwell warned about technology enabling control on a scale previously impossible. His predictions about surveillance, information manipulation, thought crime, and perpetual war describe tools any sufficiently powerful government or corporation can now use. The novel remains relevant because the technologies Orwell imagined as tools of totalitarian government are now reality, and we're still figuring out how to prevent the dystopia he warned about. Book number 3, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, 1953. Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, published in 1953, has been banned or challenged in American schools repeatedly, despite being a novel about the dangers of censorship. The book describes a future where books are illegal and firemen burn any that are found. But beyond the obvious censorship theme, Bradbury predicted specific technologies and social behaviors that seemed impossible in 1953, yet have become ordinary today, making the novel eerily prophetic about the world we now inhabit. Bradbury predicted earbuds decades before they existed. In the novel, characters wear seashell radios, tiny devices in their ears that provide constant audio content. When Bradbury wrote this in 1953, radios were large devices. The idea of miniature personal audio devices seemed futuristic. Portable transistor radios weren't commercially available until the mid-1950s. The Sony Walkman wouldn't exist until 1979. Wireless earbuds like AirPods weren't invented until 2016. Yet Bradbury described them accurately 63 years before they became ubiquitous. He even predicted their social impact with characters unable to have conversations because they are constantly listening to content. The novel predicted wall-sized televisions and interactive screens. Mildred, the protagonist's wife, is obsessed with her parlor walls, giant screens showing interactive programs where she participates in the story. In 1953, televisions were small with tiny screens. The idea of wall-sized displays seemed absurd. Today we have exactly what Bradbury described. Flat-screen TVs can be wall-sized. Interactive content, video calls, and streaming create the immersive experience Bradbury predicted. His concern wasn't the technology, but its effect. Characters in Fahrenheit 451 are so absorbed in screens, they ignore real relationships. This social isolation, despite constant digital connection, describes modern society precisely. Bradbury predicted algorithmic content and echo chambers. In his future world, content is carefully curated to avoid challenging or disturbing anyone. Everything is designed to be inoffensive and entertaining. This content curation creates a population that doesn't think critically because they never encounter challenging ideas. Social media algorithms now do exactly this, showing users content that reinforces their existing beliefs and filtering out challenging information. Bradbury's firemen who burn books have digital equivalents in content moderation, deplatforming, and algorithm adjustment that controls what information reaches people. The novel predicted voluntary abandonment of reading. In Fahrenheit 451, books aren't initially banned by the government. People stopped reading because books were too slow and demanding compared to instant screen entertainment. The government banned books after they became irrelevant. Bradbury understood that information could be suppressed not through force, but by making it unappealing compared to easier entertainment. Literacy rates may be high, but deep reading of complex texts has declined as people spend more time with short-form digital content. Bradbury's prediction that people would choose superficial entertainment over challenging books has largely come true. Fahrenheit 451 was banned because of profanity and perceived anti-religious content. The irony of banning a book about banning books was not lost on anyone, but the novel's deeper prediction was about voluntary information control. Bradbury worried less about government censorship than about citizens censoring themselves by choosing entertainment over knowledge. The technologies he predicted have arrived and created exactly the society he warned about, where people have access to unlimited information, but choose not to engage with it deeply because distracting entertainment is more appealing. Book number 4, We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, 1924. We by Russian author Yevgeny Zamyatin, published in 1924, was banned in the Soviet Union and remained unpublished there until 1988. The novel describes a future totalitarian state called One State, where citizens live in transparent glass buildings, follow precise schedules, and are monitored constantly. Written just years after the Russian Revolution, Zamyatin predicted where Soviet communism would lead with frightening accuracy. His vision of total state control predated and influenced both Brave New World and 1984, yet remains less known because it was successfully suppressed for decades. Zamyatin predicted transparent surveillance architecture. In We, all buildings are made of glass so citizens can see into each other's apartments at all times. Only during sanctioned personal hour are curtains allowed. This architectural transparency ensures social control through constant visibility. When Zamyatin wrote this, it seemed like bizarre dystopian exaggeration. Modern surveillance technology has created similar transparency without glass buildings. Social media makes private life public. Smartphones track location constantly. Security cameras watch public spaces. The Internet of Things means appliances, cars, and homes generate data about behavior. Zamyatin understood that transparency, whether literal or digital, would be a tool of control. The novel predicted collectivism destroying individual identity. Citizens in one state are identified by numbers, not names. The protagonist is D503, a mathematician who builds a spaceship. Individual desires are considered mental illness requiring treatment. The state eliminates privacy, romance, and personal choice, forcing citizens into collective identity. Zamyatin wrote this observing early Soviet attempts to reshape human nature. The Soviet Union would later implement many of the control mechanisms Zamyatin predicted, including suppression of individualism, thought reform, and punishment for deviation from collective norms. His prediction that totalitarian systems would attempt to eliminate the self and create generic collective citizens describes Soviet reality for decades. Zamyatin predicted the use of surgery and medical intervention for political control. In We, citizens who show signs of imagination or individual thought are sent for surgical removal of their imagination center. The state uses medicine as a tool of control, forcing compliance through procedures that alter brain function. The Soviet Union would later use psychiatric hospitals to imprison dissidents, diagnosing political opposition as mental illness and forcing treatment. Zamyatin's prediction that totalitarian states would medicalize dissent and use doctors as instruments of control proved accurate. The novel predicted algorithmic control of daily life. Citizens in one state follow the table of hours, a precise schedule dictating every activity. They eat, work, sleep, and exercise at assigned times. This regimentation eliminates spontaneity and ensures predictable behavior. Modern life, with its algorithms determining content, schedules optimizing productivity, and tracking systems monitoring behavior has created similar regimentation voluntarily. Zamyatin predicted that humans could be conditioned to accept total schedule control, not through force but by making it seem efficient and rational. We was banned because Soviet authorities recognized themselves in one state. Zamyatin's predictions about where total state control would lead were too accurate. The novel exposed the logical endpoint of communist ideology. By suppressing the book for 64 years, the Soviets proved Zamyatin's point about totalitarian information control. The novel remains relevant because its predictions about surveillance, collectivism, and control through transparency describe not just Soviet communism, but any system that prioritizes collective order over individual freedom. Book number 5, The Iron Heel by Jack London, 1908. The Iron Heel by Jack London, published in 1908, was one of the first novels predicting corporate oligarchy and fascism, decades before either became reality. The book describes America transformed into a totalitarian state controlled by wealthy capitalists who crush labor movements and establish an authoritarian regime. London's predictions about wealth inequality, corporate political power, and the alliance between capital and government to suppress workers seemed exaggerated when published. A century later, his vision of oligarchic capitalism has proven disturbingly accurate about how economic power concentrates and transforms into political control. London predicted the merger of corporate and state power. In The Iron Heel, wealthy industrialists, called the Oligarchy, seized control of government and military, using them to crush opposition and maintain dominance. This wasn't capitalism or democracy, but a new system where economic elites controlled political institutions directly. When London wrote this, the United States claimed to be a democracy with separation between business and government. London predicted this separation would collapse as wealth concentrated. Today, the revolving door between corporations and government, the influence of lobbying and campaign contributions, and the protection of corporate interests through government policy has created the oligarchic capitalism London described. The novel predicted extreme wealth inequality and the disappearance of the middle class. London's Future America has a tiny, ultra-wealthy oligarchy, a small class of favored workers who serve them, and a vast underclass of impoverished people with no economic opportunities. The middle class is eliminated because it's a political threat to oligarchic control. Contemporary wealth inequality in the United States has reached levels approaching London's prediction, with billionaires controlling unprecedented wealth, while wages stagnate and economic mobility declines. The elimination of the middle class that London predicted as a deliberate policy is happening through economic forces, creating the two-tier society he warned about. London predicted the use of mercenary forces and private security to suppress dissent. The oligarchy in the Iron Heel maintains power through violence, including hiring mercenaries to crush labor strikes and intimidate organizers. When London wrote this, police and military were public institutions. He predicted economic elites would develop private armed forces loyal to wealth, not law. The growth of private military contractors, private security forces, and corporate control of enforcement capacity has realized London's prediction. The state monopoly on legitimate violence has been partially privatized exactly as London warned. The novel predicted the manipulation of information and control of media. The oligarchy controls newspapers and information flow, ensuring only their perspective reaches the public. Workers are bombarded with propaganda, justifying the system, while opposing views are suppressed. London understood that economic control would extend to information control. The concentration of media ownership, algorithmic control of information flow, and the ability of wealthy individuals and corporations to shape public discourse has created the information environment London predicted, where economic power determines what people learn and believe. The Iron Heel was controversial because it explicitly criticized capitalism and predicted class war. Some editions were censored or modified to reduce revolutionary content. London's predictions about oligarchic capitalism, wealth inequality, private security forces, and information control have become reality not through revolution, but through the gradual transformation of democratic capitalism into the system London warned about, where economic power becomes absolute power. Book number 6, It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis, 1935. It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis, published in 1935, was not officially banned, but was removed from some libraries and challenged repeatedly for its controversial content. The novel describes how American democracy could transform into fascism through democratic means. Lewis predicted specific tactics that authoritarian movements would use, including populist rhetoric, scapegoating minorities, undermining institutions, controlling media, and using violence against opponents. Writing as Hitler and Mussolini rose to power in Europe, Lewis argued that Americans were dangerously naive, believing it can't happen here. His predictions about how democracies die from within have proven accurate repeatedly. Lewis predicted the rise of a populist demagogue exploiting economic anxiety. The novel's dictator, Buzz Windrip, promises to make America great again through simple solutions to complex problems. He appeals to working-class voters who feel left behind by the establishment. He uses folksy language and positions himself as a champion of common people against elites despite being funded by wealthy interests. Lewis understood that economic crisis creates conditions for authoritarianism and that populist rhetoric could mobilize voters against democratic institutions. This pattern has repeated in multiple countries with leaders using economic grievance to gain power, then dismantling democracy. The novel predicted scapegoating minorities and immigrants. Windrip blames America's problems on specific groups, creating enemies to unite supporters. He promises to remove these dangerous others and restore the country to a mythical past. Lewis saw that authoritarian movements need enemies, and that targeting minorities could be politically effective. This scapegoating strategy has been used by authoritarian movements worldwide, proving Lewis predicted a reliable pattern rather than a one-time phenomenon. Lewis predicted the undermining of democratic institutions and the press. Windrip's regime attacks courts, Congress, and journalism, calling them corrupt and enemies of the people. He replaces institutional authority with personal loyalty. Lewis understood that democratic norms and institutions only work if people believe in them, and that a leader who successfully delegitimizes institutions can accumulate unchecked power. The pattern of authoritarian leaders attacking courts, legislatures, and press while claiming to represent the true will of the people has played out repeatedly, validating Lewis's warning. The novel predicted the use of paramilitaries in political violence. Windrip creates the Minutemen, a paramilitary force loyal to him personally that intimidates opponents and enforces loyalty. Lewis saw that authoritarians need armed supporters willing to use violence outside legal constraints. The rise of militia movements, paramilitaries, and politically motivated violence has followed the pattern Lewis predicted, where leaders encourage armed supporters who provide muscle while maintaining deniability. Lewis predicted the complicity of elites and institutions. In the novel, business leaders, religious figures, and intellectuals initially support Windrip, believing they can control him or that he's better than the alternative. By the time they realize their mistake, it's too late. Lewis understood that authoritarianism succeeds not just through the strongman, but through institutional collaboration. The pattern of elites supporting or tolerating authoritarian leaders has repeated, with many initially dismissing threats, then being surprised when democracy actually falls. It can't happen. Here was controversial because it suggested American democracy was fragile. Lewis challenged American exceptionalism, arguing fascism could emerge anywhere if conditions were right. His predictions about populist demagogues, scapegoating, institutional undermining, and elite complicity have proven accurate not just in America, but in democracies worldwide. The novel's title is ironic because Lewis demonstrated exactly how it could happen by showing the specific steps through which democracy transforms into dictatorship. Book number 7, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, 1985. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, published in 1985, has been banned or challenged in multiple school districts for sexual content and anti-religious themes. The novel describes a theocratic dictatorship called Gilead that overthrows the United States government and reduces women to reproductive slavery. Atwood insisted she included nothing in the novel that hadn't already happened in some society at some time. Her predictions about religious authoritarianism, reproductive control, and the rapid collapse of democratic norms have become more relevant decades after publication, as movements seeking to restrict rights and impose religious law have gained power. Atwood predicted the use of fertility crisis to justify authoritarian control. In The Handmaid's Tale, environmental damage has caused widespread infertility, giving the regime justification to control reproduction completely. Women are reduced to their biological function, with fertile women forced into sexual slavery for procreation. While a true fertility crisis hasn't occurred, the rhetoric around declining birth rates and demographic concerns has been used to justify restricting reproductive rights. Atwood predicted that control over reproduction would be central to authoritarian systems, and that biological arguments would justify stripping women of autonomy. The novel predicted rapid constitutional collapse through emergency. Gilead seizes power by assassinating Congress and the president, declaring an emergency and suspending the Constitution. Citizens initially believe this is temporary, but democracy never returns. Atwood understood that democratic institutions could fall quickly if crisis provided justification for emergency powers. Historical examples of democratic collapse through declared emergencies from Weimar Germany to modern democratic backsliding have followed Atwood's predicted pattern where temporary measures become permanent. Atwood predicted the alliance between religious fundamentalism and state power. Gilead justifies all policies through selective interpretation of religious texts. Women's subjugation, slavery, public executions, and repression are all presented as divinely mandated. Atwood saw that religious rhetoric could be weaponized to justify authoritarianism, and that theocratic movements would seek state power to impose their vision. The global rise of religious nationalism and attempts to establish religious law through state power have proven Atwood's prediction that religion could become a tool of authoritarian control. The novel predicted environmental collapse, driving social breakdown. Gilead emerges partly because pollution and radiation have devastated the environment, creating food shortages and health crises. Atwood understood that ecological disaster would create conditions for authoritarian solutions. Climate change, resource depletion, and environmental degradation are now recognized as threats to democratic stability, exactly as Atwood predicted, with environmental crisis potentially providing justification for authoritarian control. Atwood predicted the normalization of extremism. In the novel, former feminists and liberals rationalized Gilead, arguing, women are safer now, or that the system provides stability. Atwood understood that humans adapt to oppression and that what seems impossible can become normal quickly. The concept of Overton window shift, where previously unthinkable policies become acceptable through gradual normalization, describes the process Atwood depicted of people adjusting to authoritarianism. The Handmaid's Tale was banned because it criticized religious fundamentalism and depicted sexual violence. But Atwood's deeper prediction was about the fragility of rights and how quickly society can change when authoritarians gain power. The novel's accuracy about the mechanisms of religious authoritarianism, reproductive control, constitutional collapse, and normalization of extremism has made it more relevant decades after publication. Atwood's warning that it could happen here has proven prescient as movements seeking to restrict rights and impose religious authority have gained power globally, proving her prediction that no society is immune to theocratic authoritarianism. Book number 8, Stand on Zanzibar by John Brunner, 1968. Stand on Zanzibar by John Brunner, published in 1968, was not widely banned, but was considered too controversial for some libraries due to its content and language. The novel predicted the world of 2010 with shocking accuracy, including overpopulation, terrorism, genetic engineering, information overload, and corporate dominance. Brunner made dozens of specific predictions about technology and society. Many seemed absurd in 1968, but have come true, making the novel one of the most prophetically accurate science fiction works ever written about the early 21st century. Brunner predicted the internet and information overload. The novel depicts a world where people are overwhelmed by constant information from multiple sources. Characters suffer from too much data, unable to process the flood of news and content. In 1968, personal computers didn't exist. The internet wouldn't be invented for decades. Yet Brunner accurately predicted not just the technology, but its psychological effects. He coined the term worm for self-replicating computer programs decades before computer worms and viruses became reality. His description of information overload and attention fragmentation perfectly describes modern digital life. The novel predicted genetic engineering and designer babies. Characters discuss genetic screening, modification, and enhancement decades before such technologies existed. Brunner predicted not just the science, but the social debates around it, including corporate control of genetic technology and inequality based on genetic enhancement. Today, debates about CRISPR, genetic screening, and designer babies follow exactly the patterns Brunner predicted, including concerns about access, ethics, and corporate ownership of genetic technologies. Brunner predicted terrorism as a constant threat in security theater. The novel's world features random terrorist attacks, security checkpoints, and surveillance systems everywhere. This level of security concern seemed paranoid in 1968. After September 11, 2001, Brunner's prediction of permanent security states, terrorism fear, and surveillance infrastructure became reality. He understood that terrorism would be used to justify unprecedented surveillance and control. The novel predicted corporate power superseding national governments. In Brunner's future, corporations are more powerful than many countries. They operate private military forces, conduct their own foreign policy, and control governments through economic leverage. When Brunner wrote this, corporations were powerful but still subordinate to nation-states. The rise of multinational corporations with budgets larger than countries, corporate influence over government policy, and private military contractors has realized Brunner's prediction of corporate sovereignty. Brunner predicted social media and viral content. Characters consume constant streams of entertainment and news, becoming addicted to instant updates. The novel depicts parasocial relationships with celebrities and the collapse of attention spans. These predictions were made 25 years before the internet and 46 years before modern social media, yet Brunner accurately described how always-on media would change human behavior and relationships. Stand on Zanzibar was controversial for its fragmented narrative style and mature content, but its real impact was predictive accuracy. Brunner made specific predictions about the year 2010, including global population, technology, social problems, and political structures. An analysis of his predictions found he was correct about the majority of them. The novel stands as proof that imaginative writers sometimes see future trends before they're obvious to everyone else. Brunner's accuracy about information overload, genetic engineering, terrorism, corporate power, and social media makes the novel essential reading for understanding how our present was predicted decades ago. Book number 9, The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster, 1909. The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster, published in 1909, is a short story rather than a novel, but its predictive accuracy warrants inclusion. The story was not officially banned, but was considered disturbing and pessimistic. Forster predicted a future where humans live isolated in underground cells, communicating only through technology. Each person lives in a room served by a machine that provides everything. Physical contact is rare and disturbing. People interact through screens and audio rather than face-to-face. Written in 1909, this seemed like bizarre dystopian fantasy. Today it reads like a description of pandemic lockdowns and digital life, making it perhaps the most accurate prediction of modern isolation, despite being over a century old. Forster predicted video calls and remote communication. In The Machine Stops, people communicate through screens that show moving images and transmit voices. They can speak and see each other without physical proximity. When Forster wrote this, telephones were cutting-edge technology. Television wouldn't be invented for decades. Video calling seemed impossible, yet Forster described Zoom calls with precise accuracy 114 years before they became essential. He predicted not just the technology, but its social impact, with people preferring screen communication to physical presence. The story predicted the internet and instant access to information. The machine provides instant access to all human knowledge. People can request information on any topic and receive immediate responses. This global knowledge network, accessible from individual rooms, describes the internet perfectly. Forster predicted it would make people knowledgeable, but not wise, with access to infinite information, but declining ability to generate original ideas. This critique of internet culture, where everyone can access everything but few create anything new, proves prescient. Forster predicted remote work and digital isolation. Characters in The Machine Stops live alone in rooms, working and socializing entirely through technology. They never physically meet others and consider in-person contact disgusting. Physical travel is rare, with most communication happening remotely. The pandemic lockdowns, where millions worked from home, avoiding physical contact and maintaining relationships entirely through screens, seemed to realize Forster's vision exactly. He predicted not just the technology, but the preference for digital over physical interaction. The story predicted algorithmic dependence and learned helplessness. Humans in The Machine Stops have become completely dependent on technology. They've forgotten how systems work and are helpless without the machine. When the machine begins failing, they can't fix it, because understanding of basic mechanical principles has been lost. Forster predicted that technological advancement would create vulnerability through dependence. Modern society's reliance on complex systems few people understand creates exactly the vulnerability Forster warned about. The Machine Stops predicted worship of technology as religion. Characters treat the machine with religious devotion, believing it infallible and perfect. Criticism of technology is heresy. Forster understood that humans could transfer religious impulses to technology, treating it as a god. The quasi-religious devotion to technology companies and products. The faith that technology will solve all problems, and the inability to imagine life without it, validates Forster's prediction that technology would become an object of worship. The story was considered pessimistic and disturbing. Critics found Forster's vision of isolated humans dependent on technology depressing. But his predictions about video calls, the internet, remote work, learned helplessness, and technology worship have proven accurate. A story written in 1909 when cars were new describes our digital age with disturbing precision. Forster saw where technology-enabled isolation would lead over a century before it became reality, proving that sometimes the oldest predictions are the most accurate. Book number 10, Lord of the Flies by William Golding, 1954. Lord of the Flies by William Golding, published in 1954, has been banned or challenged in schools worldwide for violence and perceived immorality. The novel describes British schoolboys stranded on an island who rapidly descend into savagery, forming tribes, establishing hierarchies, and eventually committing murder. Golding argued the novel was about the evil inherent in human nature. But beyond its philosophical themes, Lord of the Flies predicted specific social phenomena that have become reality, including reality television dynamics, mob mentality amplified by social media, and the speed with which civilized behavior collapses under certain conditions. Golding predicted reality television dynamics decades before reality TV existed. Lord of the Flies depicts a closed social system where individuals compete for status, form alliances, manipulate each other, and turn on those who break group norms. Television didn't exist in most homes in 1954. Reality TV wouldn't emerge until decades later. Yet Golding's depiction of tribal competition, strategic alliances, mob mentality, and elimination of the weak describes reality television formats with precise accuracy. Shows like Survivor literally recreated Lord of the Flies scenarios, proving Golding predicted how humans would behave when isolated and competing under observation. The novel predicted social media mob dynamics. The boys form factions that attack dissenters. Individuals who question the group are harassed and eventually killed. Mob mentality overtakes individual reason, with the group committing violence no individual would do alone. Golding wrote this describing physical tribal behavior, but perfectly predicted online mob dynamics, where social media users form groups that attack targets, shame dissenters, and create digital pylons. The speed with which reasonable discussion turns to mob violence in Lord of the Flies mirrors how quickly social media conversations become harassment campaigns. Golding predicted the appeal of authoritarianism and strongman leadership. Jack the antagonist gains power by offering security and simple solutions. He creates an enemy in the form of the beast rallying boys around fear. He uses violence to maintain control and rewards loyalty. The boys initially resist but gradually accept authoritarian rule, finding comfort in clear hierarchy and absolute leader. Golding understood that people under stress will trade freedom for security, and that authoritarian leaders who promise protection gain support by manufacturing threats. This pattern of embracing strongmen during crisis has repeated globally, validating Golding's insight. The novel predicted how quickly civilization collapses when institutions fail. The boys start with democratic intentions, holding elections and following rules. Within weeks, they're painting faces and hunting each other. Golding's point was that the veneer of civilization is thin and that humans revert quickly to tribal violence when social structures fail. Historical examples of rapid social collapse during disasters, genocides, and civil wars have proven this prediction accurate. The speed of breakdown in Lord of the Flies from civilization to savagery in weeks once seemed exaggerated, but has been matched by real-world collapses. Golding predicted the power of ritual and symbolism in group identity. The boys paint their faces and perform dances that transform them psychologically. These rituals create group identity and reduce individual inhibition, making violence easier. Golding understood that humans use ritual to sublimate individuality into group identity. Modern examples of political movements using symbols, chants, and rituals to create group cohesion and reduce individual moral restraint prove his prediction that ritual enables mob behavior. Lord of the Flies was banned because it depicted children committing murder and suggested humans are inherently evil. But Golding's predictions about reality TV dynamics, mob mentality, authoritarian appeal, rapid social collapse, and the power of ritual have proven accurate. The novel remains relevant because it predicted specific social behaviors that have become visible in reality television, social media, and political movements. Golding showed that sophisticated technology doesn't change basic human nature and that tribal instincts persist under civilized surfaces. His prediction that civilization is fragile and that humans quickly revert to tribal violence when institutions fail has been confirmed repeatedly, making the novel more prophetic now than when published 70 years ago.